Everyone, thanks. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And obviously my area of expertise is more in sort of line with what Richard's talked about previously. So I'll have a crack at the other stuff, which is it's really good to have to talk to you all about. And obviously, if there are any questions that I can't answer, we'll take those away and see if I can come up with something offline. But bit of an introduction first. As said, I'm Tim Mulry. I work for the TSA, which is the Tech Services Association. Who are we? We're a member-based industry body. There's about 370, give or take, organisations that are members across the UK and abroad. Those members are local authorities, housing associations, manufacturers, all stakeholders within the tech industry. And our role is really to drive the transformation of the tech sector through really strengthening those partnerships with members and non-members in the industry. We also develop standards, and we provide independent and trusted audits and certification for members, and those audits then and certificates form part of procurement frameworks, so that local authorities, for example, can feel confident that they can do business with certain organisations within the tech sector. And then finally, we provide independent support and knowledge share to our members and non-members, webinars, one-to-ones, help desk, etc., etc. So anyway, the art of the possible. So I'm going to talk first of all about something that we were really joint authors of, which was the joint commission between the TSA and with ADAS, the Association of Directors of Social Services. And that study really identified, something that initially, obviously, everyone is aware of. The need for social care is rising. About 1.9 million new requests for social care in 1920, driven by a pandemic as well, but also the fact that there were around 5 million people really juggling those caring responsibilities. And 76% of care providers said that using technology they felt led to better outcomes for individuals, and 66% felt that it freed up staff time in order to provide more meaningful support. However, only 11% of social workers felt that their training gave them the, if you like, the digital readiness for their role. So the report really came up with 5 recommendations. I'll just actually flick back a slide. There is the link to this report as well, bottom right hand corner. I know the slides are going to be shared afterwards, so please click on the link and go through it yourself, because I won't sort of cover all the bits and pieces on this call today, but I'll talk about some of the recommendations. So essentially co-production, and the commission really focused on the fact that outcomes can only really be, or good outcomes can only really be achieved through co-production with people, recipients, with families, with carers, etc. Also, digital infrastructure, a real issue is around this kind of skills and approaches in order to maximise those digital opportunities. Thirdly, people really responded as part of this about needing their own control of their own data, and that really came out in the co-production side of things, where people obviously being in control of their own sort of health and social care data meant they had access to the right data at the right time, really to help support themselves. And it's collaboration and integration to promote outcomes, so really a joined up approach. And we, I know Richard talked about that on the previous presentation, but really a big challenge for this industry is around how to work with partner organizations, how to share data, etc., to again achieve those right outcomes. So I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview now of really the UK application of technology-enabled care as it stands at the moment. So As was said previously, there's around 170 alarm receiving centres currently in place in the UK. So what are those alarm receiving centres? They are essentially contact centres receiving calls from elderly, from vulnerable people through these alarm units that sit in people's homes that the earlier diagrams will have so adequately explained. Of those 170 alarm receiving centres, they're receiving, or they're connected to, probably now in excess of 1.8 million. Some estimates believe in excess of 2 million connections. So let's say 1.8 to 2 million people. And they can be, those connections tend to be categorized in two different ways. So the greater share, the circa 1.3 million, is what's called dispersed connections. So those are people living in their own homes generally, who have an individual alarm connected to one of these alarm receiving centres, so that if they press a pendant, or if they have a fall, or if a smoke alarm goes off, it will connect to those alarm receiving centres. And then the operators there will then make a decision through either communication with the individual or through the type of alert that goes off as to how to take that forward. Is that, you know, local response, neighbour? Is it ambulance? Is it fire brigade, etc.? And then what you've got is 500,000 connections, which are in grouped locations. So tend to be in what might be known previously as warden controlled, or extra care, or any kind of building or collection of buildings where there's a, if you like, a shared infrastructure. Now, what we've also seen from our studies is that there's about a quarter of those who are currently, of those connections, that are privately paying for their service. So we see 3/4 funded really through state services, 1/4 essentially paying for it themselves, or friends, or more likely family paying for it on behalf of a loved one. In the UK, we are seeing new proactive services being developed. So, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but there are things such as proactive wellbeing calls, medication checks, smart monitoring in the home, proactive outreach ahead of crisis, and really there are examples where insights from data are being used. And again, I'll talk about some examples of that later, really around the proactive and preventative side of things. So rather than responding when someone's had a fall, how can you actually start to look at the data before they're in it, you know, they have the fall, so that maybe you can start to see things in there, how they really carry out their activities of daily living, etc., to spot that and prevent it from happening. There is that strong demand from consumers, from commissioners, for interoperability, as well as solutions to help people outside the home. So of those 1.8 million connections we talked about, the vast majority of those are in the home. So there's lots of things that are designed to keep people safe in the home, but not necessarily as much when they're outside of the home, when they're accessing the community and things like that. And there are, or there is a big drive around kind of learning disabilities, autism, etc., around really providing the tools to support people around routine and self-care and areas like that. And then finally, there's a growth in the provision of mobile response. So it's recognised that actually there are a lot of people out there that don't have access to family networks, to neighbours, etc. But also there's a real drive to avoid ambulance call outs. And when you're looking at kind of average 6-7 hour waits for ambulance, in some cases going into days waiting for ambulances, and people have passed away as a result, how can the system provide a mobile response that can help to combat that? Okay. So as well as that, we've got some drivers for technology across social care, health, public health and housing. Talked a little bit about risk reduction already. So you've got, if you like, the monitoring of inactivity and dehydration. Dehydration leads to dizziness, leads to potential falling and things like that. So about having things that can spot that at an earlier stage. You've got areas like falls prevention, where you've got gait analysis, wearables, again designed to spot and early intervention and promote early intervention in that. Proactive audio and video calls. So that could be, as I've said earlier, medication, but it also can be to promote public health messaging, etc., and improve social isolation. The independence in the community is a real driver, as I've said. Devices that monitor, for example, people's GPS whereabouts out in the community, about providing the equivalent support in the community as there is in the home. We see a growing instance of care delivery at distance, virtual care visits, again, medication and well-being remotely, and there are care providers that are getting involved, you know, in that side of things more so than delivering face-to-face visits. And we know from the pressure that's on the care provider industry at the moment in terms of workforce and things like that, how that can support some of the challenges there. And then finally, the housing side of things. So, and I'll go on to talk a little bit more about how the TSA are working with Housing Lynn around this, but certainly providing an enabling efficiency in the home, whether that's things like room-to-room video calling, efficiency around repairs, reminders, calendars, etc., to help people, room-to-room video calling, etc. So within the TSA, we've developed what we call the progression of need. So what you've got is historically, or on the right-hand side of this diagram, is more where the technology-enabled care has stood in previous years, where it's been predominantly focused around people with complex needs, delaying residential care, and those sort of areas. And what the sort of the role, I think, of our industry is to ensure that through the deployment of technology-enabled care, you've got you're pushing those interventions earlier in this cycle, earlier in this wheel, which is looking at more of promoting self-care, early help, prevention services and community signposting, and those sort of areas here, rather than focusing too far on the right-hand side. Yes, there is that need there, but actually how can we drive it so that it's being deployed more at an earlier stage? And some of these enablers at the bottom that we've talked about, interoperability and working in partnerships, etc., and working with commissioners. From a TSA perspective, we drive quality standards, and we have a real focus on workforce. So how can we support not just social workers, but all workforce within this industry in order to improve their knowledge, if you like, of technology-enabled care? And sort of finally, something else that we're heavily involved is around benefits realization, because one of the challenges that kind of we hear quite a lot of is, well, how do we know, what's the return on investment if we're going to invest X amount in this preventative technology? How can we prove ultimately to the budget holders that it's not just a waste of time, that it is actually making a difference? So just going to go on to talk a little bit about the technology for our aging population, what we know as TAPI, and certainly this is phase 2 of TAPI. I know Jeremy Portis is on the call, and Jeremy, feel free to jump in at the end if I need any clarification or anything. But essentially what the TSA are doing in conjunction with Housing Lynn and a number of other organisations is about taking the principles from the original TAPI framework and then driving those into implementation. So what does that mean in practice? Well, you've got the objectives, the TAPI 2 objectives, which is to seek to co-produce a TAPI framework, working with 6 local test beds or demonstrator sites across the UK, across the home nations, if you like, and really to lead with community-based organisations who are interested in ensuring that the principles of phase 1 are developed and tested in real settings. So this phase is about gathering the evidence of what is possible and really challenging what is perceived to be not possible. The role here of TAPI 2 is really to build on the learning that we've gathered and create some new scalable housing service models, really using technology-enabled care. And the idea is to support personalisation and really deliver better outcomes for people. Again, there's a link in the slides there for people that want to go and get some more information on that. I won't go into too much detail about this, but there are some key program elements, and certainly co-production and evaluation, you know, working with partners, building an evaluation framework, really putting that evaluation into action and providing the tools and guidance for all organizations to follow this program. Because really these test beds are about what can we do, and then really how can that be deployed at scale across the UK. And again, workforce training standards are really, really high on that program as well. So I won't talk about the demonstrator sites as such at this stage. They are on the link, but it is looking at different housing types, looking at, you know, urban and rural settings. How can enabling technology and the principles of TAPI be adopted to provide really better outcomes, personalised outcomes? And how can we work with residents to develop more proactive engagement around empowering residents, the local community agencies, more proactive outreach, really. So again, really exciting programme that we're leading with the Housing LIN, and yeah, we hope to take those forward and really drive some positive outcomes on the back of that. Again, I promised that we'd talk about some of the applications of future technology across health and care, and this is just a relatively small selection. Again, as we've talked about, there is a lot of kind of traditional technology out there, a lot of very simple button and box and technology on that side. This is about, you know, really what is the art of the possible, what is out there at the moment. So whether it's pain check on the top left hand side here. So this combines notes on pain relating to movement and voice and behavior with facial recognition software, really looking at the signs of pain, and initially that's being trialed in some care homes at the moment, and we're, you know, looking quite closely on how that's going to come out. In the top one here, we've got the Alexa Together, which is combining the full detection with requesting assistance through a smart speaker. We've got the Sengled product, which is a bulb that is able to read heart rate, body temperature, other vital signs through non-invasive sensors like light bulbs, essentially, using radar sensors instead of infrared sensor. So it can penetrate through some material rather than infrared, which is fairly historically has been used for some of that stuff. This is the pendant, one of the pendants, the ChipTech Go, that can be used out in the community, which again is really vital to make sure that people can feel like they can access the community safely. And Roommate here is a infrared sensor, but you can see how it can do fall detection and start to build into the fabric of the home, really allowing sort of more independent analysis without breaching, if you like, people's privacy and things like that. So there are examples where all of those are being deployed either in test or in production. And something, you know, touched on earlier is around, essentially our industry has got to move into how can really, the Internet of Things is no longer a futuristic phase or phrase, sorry. Technology is increasingly interoperable, and people are demanding that interoperability. But there is scope, and we have seen again examples where people are demanding that their technology-enabled care does work with their everyday high street technology. So we have to ensure that we've got trusted devices which although may not have the, if you like, the class of protection or life critical that we would look for in some of the basic technology enabled care, we need to look at the fact that actually there's a lot of Internet of Things stuff that can really support people with the early interaction, early intervention, and keeping people safe at home. And how can we get that into everyday commissioning as well? I'll just talk about a small case study, which is again using people, sensors around the home and tracking movement, tracking habits, and looking at changes in habits. And there's a nice story here about Alf. Now, Alf is looks pretty good here for 96 years old. Obviously, that's not Alf, but Alf is a real person. And this story is about how lifestyle monitoring can actually improve packages of care that have been deployed initially from hospitals and things like that, and how the technology can work with care provider packages in order to enable people to live more safely at home, but obviously also demonstrate some return on investment. So there is a reason there for those packages of care. And essentially in Alf's story, of which there are many stories of this nature, monitoring was used to really detect movement around the home, spot things red, amber, green, and suggest next steps. So in this example, Alf had multiple toilet visits, had raised a flag, which then there was a proactive way to treat that by spotting a UTI and things, and meaning that Alf was not susceptible to falling as he would have been had that intervention not taken place. And as mentioned on the slide, Surrey Council worked with Mole Valley District Council around ensuring that this technology is in place and are measuring cuts in A&E visits, and also some domiciliary care packages. That's not to take away from domiciliary care, because there is a lot of unmet needs out there. So it's just about making that a bit more of a targeted approach. So final slide. Again, some of the things I've talked about today are, if you like, art of the possible, but also there's some basic pathways that technology enabled care needs to work and will work with, as long as the commissioners and the social workers and people on that, who are making those decisions, feel that technology enabled care will really make a difference. So whether that's in D2A, about right sizing the package of care, not just chucking people out with 4 times double-handed calls a day, leading to kind of delays in placement, or in most cases inappropriate pathway discharge. Again, reablement, really simple technology enabled care interventions can be made there around improving independence, ensuring a responder service, etc. Long-term care, we see tech being deployed in some cases to help with care package reviews. So it's about helping people to stay out of residential care normally, but also around early intervention and preventing acute incidents. And then finally, touched on this earlier, but learning disability autism, there is lots of technology out there that can help with education, with training, with routine building and things like that, about how that can be deployed in those pathways. So, okay, that's me. Apologies if I've gone a couple of minutes early, over, sorry. But yeah, thank you for that.